So first off, I have to thank Madeline because she looked at my presentation beforehand and made it beautiful. And it was not. So thank you, Madeline. So Madeline mentioned NewsCred, just so you have a little bit of background. NewsCred is a content marketing company. Who here has heard of content marketing? Great. Jeremy, I'm glad you've heard of it. So content marketing is essentially this way that tech companies came out a while ago and started writing content on the web in their blogs, and then big companies said, wait a second, these little companies are stealing all of the attention on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and such. So they said, how do we get into this? And NewsCred was born. So NewsCred provides the software to make that all possible for these companies. I recently started a company called Parsec. I'm going to give you a little bit of information about it. If you're into if you're into gaming, PC gaming, or console gaming, let me know. You can now start playing that without a console or without a PC. It's available as of today. We just launched our alpha today after 6 weeks of development, so really exciting. Okay, now into the real part of the presentation. So has anyone heard of any of these ways to prioritize product? Yeah, so I don't know what some of these mean, like Moscow. I don't know what that means. There's a couple others. I basically did a Google search looking for different ways to prioritize product. And the reason why there's so many ways to do this is because prioritizing products is really, really difficult. But this presentation isn't so much about is about choosing what that list of things is that you work on. It's more about how do you get the buy-in of your organization and really create the political capital that you need to be successful as a product manager or a designer in a larger company. Because despite all these great methods to, oh no, all right, well, this doesn't work, but despite the emojis are not coming through, but despite all of these great ways to come up with a list of products like cost-benefit analysis, jobs to be done, things like that, you end up being in this situation, and these were angry emojis, but you end up being in this situation where you have all of your stakeholders basically pulling in different directions. And who's been in that situation? Right, everyone, right? So it can be pretty difficult as a product manager. There brings tears to your eyes because you think you know what the right thing to do is, but at the end of the day, you are sort of guessing, really. Like, product is as much of an art as it is a science. And when you're having these conversations with the technology team or the customer support team, you are trying to put it out there and say, this is what we believe we should work on. But they have another idea. And by the way, your customer success team and your sales team are pulling in opposite directions sometimes. Sales needs something new to sell. Customer success is, can't you just make the current product amazing, right? Does that conversation happen at your companies? I mean, I'm assuming it does. If it doesn't, you can walk out. You have an easy job. I envy you. So this was the situation at NewsCred. As Madeline mentioned, it's blissful now. No, it's not. But the situation was much worse than it is today. And the reason was that mostly due to stakeholders pulling us in different directions. And whether or not we had the right list of products to build or the right feature set or what have you, at the end of the day, it always came down to trusting us and senior management's feelings about what we were building. So we would have our product council where people would come in, the product team would come in with this list of things that we want to work on in the next release, which we did cost-benefit analysis on, we talked to customers, we got all sorts of feedback, and this product council would go pretty poorly. Because you'd have people arguing, is that the right thing to do, is that not? And then after a couple hours, it was great, we were ready for the release. And as everyone's walking out, the chief revenue officer would stand up and be like, but what about asset management? And then all of a sudden we're like, okay, asset management too. But then that screws up everything because you've just added another thing to your list and you can't really add something without subtracting something. So It's just how, and then somehow that asset management thing came to the top of the list. Like, I don't know how. We didn't talk about it. It just became the most important part of our product. So the competing interests of stakeholders and the upending of plans at the end of the quarter really ended up causing a lot of trust issues and with the product organization and the R&D organization. And with that inability to develop trust, we weren't able to say no. So when the chief revenue officer or, and I use these people's today, I'm using these positions because these are the most powerful people in your company. So the chief revenue officer or the CEO come in and say, you need to build social media functionality into your software. You can't say no because they don't trust your plans. They don't trust everything that you've worked on, even though you are positive this isn't part of the vision of the product. And I'm going to play this really quick segment from Des Traynor, who is the VP of product and founder of Intercom. If you haven't heard of it, it's a great product. But essentially, he says, if you can't say yes to every one of these questions, does it fit into your vision? Is reward greater than effort? Does it benefit all customers? Will it grow the business? Will it matter in 5 years? Is this a forward step? Will it generate new engagement? If it succeeds, can we support it? If you can't answer yes to all those questions, you shouldn't build it. But when you can't answer, but when there's no trust, you can't say no, essentially. So there's one segment about the vision that I think is valuable.
A good set of, like an acid test that any new feature must score straight yeses on to actually be allowed into your product. So the most obvious one for me is, does it fit your vision? And vision is a complex thing. Every product needs a vision. You need to know what it is you're actually trying to deliver into this world. And sometimes the vision will be tied to like the CPO or the product officer, or sometimes the CEO or the founder or the original entrepreneur who had the idea. But you will make these margin calls that no one understands, where they're like, how the hell can you say that? The visualizations are included, but for some reason predictive analytics aren't. And it's just
Does that feel like part of your job where everyone's like, why the hell are you making that call? I mean, that's the same thing that I'm talking about, right? And if you don't have the ability to set this vision and get the trust, these are the types of conversations that we all get used to.
Look, it's a tricky one. You will have this fight all the damn time, right? But as the product owner, only you know what it is that you're trying to build here, right? And only you have access to all of the data. And yes, it's quite possible you could be wrong, but you're more likely to be wrong executing something you don't believe in. A good test is if you've never said no because of your product vision, then you don't have a product vision.
So I think that I like to show that because I do think that captures a lot of the problem that he's even talking about, how this happens a lot at companies, right? You're going to have these arguments, but you as the product owner, you know what should be done. But you have to build trust first. So at NewsCred, when I came in as director of product strategy, part of my goal was to establish trust in the R&D and product organization, build transparency into our decisions, and make better decisions and commitments by involving everyone in the company. Now, I did this because I basically saw my job at NewsCred as being the guy that says no to the CEO and the CRO. It wasn't fun all the time, but it was really, really important to focusing our product, and we're still working on that today. So before I jump in, I have to put this out there. You have to steal like an artist. If you haven't read that book, I think it's kind of a cute book, really quick read. But nothing is original, steal from the best. These are things that you should always do. And there's an article that I recommend on First Round Review. If you haven't read that website, it's great. It's First Round Capital's content marketing site. But it talks about the auction process at Pandora. So we took a lot of the ideas from Pandora and implemented some of them into our process. So great read, and I recommend it highly. So let's pause for a second and talk about sort of the tactical elements of what we do at NewsCred. Every release, NewsCred, and a release is about 3 months, we start a planning process. And the R&D team proposes challenges. And this is actually, challenges is an important word here, because initially we used to propose solutions to problems. But we decided to start proposing challenges to the organization because we didn't really know the solutions to those problems. We knew that our customer had the issue, but it was up to the R&D organization to eventually, during Sprint Zero presentations, to come to that solution. This is really important for a couple reasons. Number one, you make sure that your engineers and designers are getting involved in solving the problem. If you don't get your engineers and designers involved in solving the problem, you're basically using 50% of their capacity. So what we saw when we started proposing challenges, things like that, is we saw an increase, 75% increase in productivity in our engineering organization because they felt ownership over the solutions that they were proposing. Then once we have the proposals, and these can be based on cost-benefit analysis, all these different things that were listed on slide 1, we have a list of them. We then create very, very low fidelity mockups. Okay, like I'm talking the lowest you can get, maybe a drawing, because we don't want to invest a lot of time in these challenges because we don't know if we're actually going to work on them until this process is over. Then the architecture team sizes the challenges. This is important as you learn for the auction process to understand what the price of everything is. Okay, so when I talked about how at the beginning when our CRO was like, well, what about asset management? That was a problem because we didn't then have an ability to say, well, that's too much work. So we needed these architects to size these challenges very quickly so that we then had an overall economy for our auction. The auction, which we'll get into, which is the actual process of the company coming together and deciding on what to do, and then Sprint Zero presentations, which take the auction information and the engineers and designers and product managers decide on what we're actually going to do. This whole process takes about 6 weeks. It's very low amount of work, mostly for the product. It's almost all on the product team. It's a low amount of work for the designers and the engineers and everyone else, but it starts about halfway through every release. So a release is 12 weeks. We start midway through. So going into what I think looks like a good challenge and not a solution. So this is an actual challenge that showed up on one of our slides. And it says, content marketers want to measure the impact of their articles on demand generation goals and know the people who are reading the content. Okay? You could come up with like 20 different solutions to this, right? Can you guys imagine different solutions? I mean, you may not know what some of the terms mean in demand generation or things like that, but there's several ways you can solve this problem. And that's really important because we are not pitching a solution, we're pitching a challenge. This is always a sticking point at the company because someone would always say, and literally every time this guy said it, when we would go into the auction, he'd be like, I don't walk into the grocery store and just say, I need breakfast, right? He's like, I go to the Cheerios box. We're like, okay, we understand. But this is not, we haven't set the time and talked to the customers and spent the time to really figure out the solution. So it's important, it becomes very complicated to make that pitch to the team, but it is important in my mind. It's challenges, not solutions. Low fidelity mockups. So this is the mockup for that challenge. I actually think this is too high fidelity for the purposes of this. But what you see is essentially this is what a demand generation marketing funnel will look like. You have engaged people, number of leads, number of opportunities, and sales. Okay? Now, someone probably spent maybe an hour on this, I hope less, but that we want to spend as little time on these things as possible. And then when we take the challenge and the mock-up, we distribute it to the company. And the company then has an opportunity to ask questions and also think about what they would prioritize as the top challenges. And that means people like any person at the company. So a salesperson, an account manager, a customer support rep. We take all that information in. It's sort of like a wisdom of the crowds type of situation, if you've read that book. And it helps us make better decisions on what we actually end up with as part of our auction. So this is what, I like this mock-up. Madeline, did you make this?
Yeah.
Okay, I like that. So it's still very questionable as what you're going to work on, but what we've done here, and this is a slide this is basically what people buy in the auction. So the architects have sat in the room for about for maybe 2 hours. They've gone through every challenge. There's usually like 20 of them. And they've said, okay, this challenge is a small, this one is a medium, this one is a large, or an XL. That's about all they do. And then I look at last quarter's small, medium, large XLs, and I say, great, I'm going to align the price with what it was last quarter, but not what it was when they sized it, but what it was when it actually got done during the quarter. Does that make sense? So I'm trying to basically create a price that is emblematic of what our engineers can actually accomplish in a given quarter. And that amount of engineering potential in that quarter becomes the economy. So in this quarter, I think the economy was $200. Okay? So if we did this challenge, it would have represented 10% of the overall economy. Yeah.
Do you see a difference between economy and velocity?
Yeah, and what was the first part? I didn't.
Economy.
Yeah. So it's meant to try and capture the velocity from last quarter and the quarter before and say, okay, we're going to use this information to have a best guess at what we can do as a velocity for the next quarter. And for those that don't know, velocity is basically an agile measurement or Scrum measurement of how much a team gets done during a release. These are pretty high level, so it's very difficult to actually come to that conclusion as to what they really are, what the real cost is. But we try our best to do it with a little investment. So the next thing that you see here is KPI. The product team is responsible for saying what the KPI measurement is for success of this challenge. So in this case, it was approximately 60 clients visit our insights each week. We want to increase that number by 50% in the next quarter based on this change. Okay, and the idea here is to try and make it valuable in that time frame, so you can measure whether or not you were successful during the time that you were working on it and during the quarter. Then the product team is also responsible for going to the customer success account management teams and saying which of our clients does this product most affect. And at NewsCred, another thing that we implemented was something called goal clients. And goal clients are essentially the clients that we care most about having as be successful. And we choose specific clients because their use case is best for our product. They also represent the rest of our client base, and usually they represent a lot of money as well. And the goal is that those clients do not churn. So you'll see some of the clients, Conagra, Discover, Prudential, we're naming them because we plan on going to those specific clients to get feedback as we're developing this product. Yeah.
So the reason you wouldn't ask the product team or the development team to say, hey, it takes 10 weeks to make this is because you don't want them to say this is how much time, you want to say how difficult is it, and then you compare a similar project in the past and say, okay, if difficult and this is difficult, then this takes whatever it actually took.
Yeah, exactly. So basically what we're doing is we're saying, okay, they said last quarter that that something was a medium. They're saying that this is a medium. How long did it take for them to complete that medium last time? And then we assign a value as a percentage of the release.
Any reason to not just get the actual number out there?
Because we did that. So that was something we learned. We did that the first time we ran this exercise. And what it did was it caused way too much investment on the engineering team to figure out exactly how much time was going to be spent on this. And the reason why that was bad was because we have 20 slides, we'll probably only do 10 of them. And we've just wasted like a week of engineering time almost. It was crazy how much time went into figuring out the value of everything. So we really said, let's forget that and spend an hour on it, essentially.
Sorry, I'm not very familiar with this process.
Yeah.
So just want to
have the challenge, you have the KPI, which is the measurement of success.
Yep.
And you have the client affected, but you don't really have a specific description
Yes.
of the feature or so-called like possible solution.
Exactly. So this is the same thing that the CRO always said, right?
So how can the engineers measure their, let's say, their cost or time if they don't really know exactly what the thing they're going to build?
So it's a bit of a brainstorming. They're like, okay, how are we going to solve this? I mean, NewsCred's product is somewhat mature, so the engineers know that something like this has got some very little back-end work involved, mostly front-end, because all the data is available. So we have an API for that. It's a small. That's how it might go down. Like, no matter how you solve it, that's the thinking that goes behind it, right? So no matter, like, if the challenge were something completely new, they would know that they had to build a completely new functionality for it, and that would be much larger. Does that make sense?
Well, I feel like the question will be, for example, let's say because there's no like concrete, not concrete, even like a structured solution right now.
Yeah.
So I feel like one possible thing might happen is like some engineers think it might take, let's say, a month, and other engineers think that, oh, this is definitely like a 16 months thing.
Yeah.
If I want to solve it a different way. So I feel like how are you guys going to solve that kind of, let's say, possible conflict?
Yeah, I mean, that conflict can happen. There's sort of a discussion about it with the product managers involved and what we think, some brainstorming on what the solution will be. But we don't want to commit to a specific solution at this time of the process, because that happens during sprint 0, when the R&D team gets together, goes to talk to customers, talks about the challenge that the customer has, and says, here are a couple possible solutions. Madeline and her team go and say, here are some mock-ups of ways that we're going to solve this. And then at that point, that's when they make a commitment on what they're actually going to do. And sometimes some of the things that are voted on are not going to be in that commitment, because you learn that something is more difficult or easier during the process of doing it. And that's an important point, that the voting that is going to happen that I'm going to describe and the results of that voting are not commitments. And that's something else that we learned throughout this process. They're not commitments, and they're also they're not commitments from the team. They're inputs into what the team decides to work on. So they don't have to do these things. But when your entire company is telling you these are the things that are priorities, it's a pretty important input into what you do. Does that make sense? Cool. Any other questions?
Just one small question. Could you talk about this $20 price, and then you said it's 200? Can you just explain that?
Yeah. So, yeah, I'll talk about that now. So, okay, essentially, what we say is, we say that we basically assign. We have app developers and different things like that at the company. We assign specific dollar value. It's made up, completely made up. The total economy is a guess. Okay. I say $5 per every app engineer, and then we say, okay, if that's the case, small, medium, large, XL represents how many engineers' time was that last release. And then the reason that I'm using dollars is because at the end of the day, I end up using monopoly money. And, excuse me, and that monopoly money just forces people to put money down during the process. Okay, so we call this our product council, and what we do, and some of this stuff is very different from what Pandora did in their process, but we are very focused on the people with the most customer context have the most dollars. So at the beginning of the process, I say, these 12 to 15 people are on the product council for this release. I'm going to assign $20 to one person and $5 to another. The VP of engineering, who had very little customer context, got the lowest amount of money. So, and the account manager that sat on the product council, we sometimes distributed that, allowed someone new onto the product council as a reward for good work and stuff like that. That person would have more money than the VP of finance or the CFO or whatever, right? Because they have all the customer context. That's really important, because this is all about making our customers successful, not about like a power play in the company sort of thing. So We just talked about the total economy, but the total economy, again, is basically the amount of money is based on what our engineer output can be for the next release. Based on how many engineers we have, a guess at maybe we'll lose 1 or 2 engineers, gain 1 or 2, that kind of thing. And then the pricing, that $20, is all relative based on the process that I explained that we went through, where I said small last quarter, small this quarter, price. And that takes me like an hour or 2 to do. And then typically we have 12 to 15 people join the council. Typically there's 2 representatives from marketing, 3 representatives from our customer success team, 3 representatives from our sales team, CEO, all the product managers are on the product council. Their dollars typically add up to everything that the sales team has. So they get a smaller amount because there's more product managers. So there's usually like 5 product managers in the product council, but it adds up to something like the sales team to try and do that. And then the CFO and a couple other people are on the product council as well.
How much money you give to the CEO?
Huh?
How much money you give to the CEO?
CEO, okay, so let's say $20 was the maximum. CEO gets $20, CRO gets $20, VP of sales gets $20, the VP of client services gets $20, account manager gets $20, and then the VP of marketing would get like 10, the product marketer person would probably get like 6, the product managers all get like 6 to 10, somewhere in there, all equal. A designer would be in there with 6 to 10, somewhere in there. And then the VP of finance, CTO, VP of engineering would get like $2 or $3 because they didn't have any customer context.
So obviously,
And hold on, by the way, that caused a political shitstorm. Okay, so be careful with how you handle that, because oh my God, so many people were like, why am I not on the product council? Like some random person would complain and say they wanted to quit because they were on the marketing team using the product all day, and they were like, I should be on the product council with all the money because I know the product better than anyone. But they didn't really represent our typical customers, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna put you on the council just to like make this end. But those are the kinds of conversations that can happen if you're not careful about explaining what is happening here. So be careful.
my question is the notion of having different representation across the company speaks for itself, and giving those people like the lowest dollar amount makes sense if they don't, in cases where they don't actually have customer contact.
Yeah.
But then I'm also curious, for people who don't have customer contact, who don't really understand the value of a product, does it in any kind of way create sort of like awkwardness in their participation? It's like they're voting for something, but they don't really have the context. So you're trying to do the political good thing and also getting everyone involved for all the right reasons.
Yeah.
But then if they don't have the context and they're voting, it's like, what are they basing that on? Like, is there some background that you're giving to them to allow them to make some sort of intellectual choice based on?
So that's a good question. For instance, our CFO did not get invited into the product council for a little bit because she had almost zero customer context. But I did invite her in at the end, in the recent ones, because part of it was for her to learn from the process, like what is actually being discussed. And I think these people understand, like, I have $3 or $2. Don't voice your opinion too much. But it's also good to have like that person's mind in the room, because they're like, well, we have X dollars coming from this customer set. Shouldn't we be, focused on that customer set? So that's a good like line of thinking that is brought into the decision process that maybe the VP of marketing might not have thought of, right?
Perspective.
Yeah, it's the perspective that they bring really helps the conversation. And it makes the conversation so much better when you're bringing in different perspectives that maybe are looking internally, but they actually have some, as a product manager, you're building a product that is part of your business. You're solving customer needs. You're finding the overlap between customer needs and business value. So you want some of the people that understand the business value to be in that room with you.
So in the previous slide, you talked about the $20 and what that new feature or something will cost the company, as a percentage basically. When you assign dollar values to people sitting on the product council, apart from
I am assigning to how valuable they are.
right,
as a
how
person.
valuable. So yeah, exactly. But then, does that assignment only indicate to them how much they know the potential of the product in the market, or do they get to use that dollar value as a veto against a decision that is being made?
It's a good point. There are situations where something is $1 away from going over, and that person ends up having almost veto power over that. But we're all on the same team. This isn't like a group of people that is hates each other, right? They're all on the same team. They listen to each other's opinions, and they come to a conclusion that we think makes sense, hopefully, right? And it's not a competition between these people. Now there are certainly different needs and different asks in the group, but we're not trying to create animosity, right? So it's actually like a team building. It almost becomes a team building exercise, and bringing people's opinions to the front. Other questions? Cool. Okay, this is one of my favorite things that happens. Okay, this person her name is Jane Chin. She is the head of account management. So what she does, and I don't know what all of the things that this article says, or this email says, but hopefully it's not too damning, about our product. But what she's doing here is, so that each team, once the final decision is made on what is going to be in the product council, each team has 1 week to meet and decide what they want to be in, what they want to vote on, okay? So they've been included in the vetting of what should be the list, but now we've got all of the information available to them. They can now have a chance to sit down as a team and tell Jane and the VP of Client Services, this is what we should bid on, okay? So all of this information is percolating up from the bottom of what is going to be the most important stuff for client services. So Jane then, all of these people are part of the product council. She takes that information and the night before, or 2 nights before, she sends out this email. And this was totally her doing, and I now encourage everyone to do it. But this was her doing. She wrote these long emails saying, please, 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 our customers need X, Y, and Z. And it was awesome. It started a discussion, people debated on the email, and that debate is really great to even start off before we get into the product council.
So she's like the product lobbyist.
Yeah, she's lobbying for the customer. And then the marketing team, our VP of Marketing, Elise-Ann, would lobby on behalf of, guys, we have the NewsCred Summit, or the Marketo Summit coming up, which is a product that can integrate with NewsCred. We have the Marketo Summit coming up. We want to be able to make an announcement at the Marketo Summit. We need to have this challenge solved. And that challenge being the one that I showed you, which is measuring the value of demand generation content. Okay? So the night before the auction, my point is proven true every quarter. It's amazing. Nothing clears its auction price, okay? We've had 1 or 2 problems clear their auction price. And clearing your auction price means that $20, enough money from everyone has gone to pay for that functionality, or that problem, okay? And literally, maybe 1 or 2 times in a year, something has cleared its price. And that was because it was priced at $3 or $5. And one person could make it happen. So we walk into this product council, and the first thing I show is, look guys, you don't agree on anything. This is why we do this process. And we start. So the main event, essentially it's only 3 hours. We get all of these people into a room, and I don't have any money. I lead the conversation. And we talk for 3 hours, and we come to conclusions about which challenges are the most important to our customers and our business. Now, I'm going to give you a little secret. Jeremy, don't take this back to NewsCred, or Madeline. What happens is I basically make most of the decisions on what's going to happen in the release, okay? And that's because I'm leading the conversation. And the goal of this is to, one, get everyone involved and to build trust and transparency in how we work, but also to make people realize that there are trade-offs in what we do. And I'm leading the conversation so that we don't make a stupid mistake by deprioritizing something that we have to do and that is on my roadmap and that is really important. The CEO and I spend like 30 minutes before the meeting basically saying these are the things that have to happen. And then I can direct the conversation towards those things, right? But there is room available for people to bring things up and down. Like the last product council I participated in, there was one that I really thought was not important, but there was enough people in the room that said it was, that I sort of let the conversation go and allowed that to be something that we did for the release. So you have control over this event as the leader of the product council. You should have control over it. You don't want a really bad mistake to happen, but most of the things that are already made it to this point are pretty important. So what happens is we go through each one. We start with the ones that had the most dollars during the silent auction the night before, and I say, who wants to put money behind this? Everyone has literally monopoly money, and they just start putting it into the pot. We have a banker who's just there to like manage the money, and as things get crossed off, we cross them off, take them down, or leave them up just in case there's a reason why we need to go back. But then we just go through the list by letting people propose what they want to talk about next. And sometimes I make the proposal on what we talk about next, based on something not being talked about that's important. Any questions on that?
Why do you feel like it's important for you as the leader to, like, it almost sounds like you're seeding like a focus, the things that you find to be most important, as opposed to throwing things out there and letting them just surface naturally? Yeah,
I mean, it's a bit of a game to play, like to make sure that certain things make it, and it's a little bit of seeing, like, there's a few times I've done it where there's like something that just doesn't make sense for us to do over, like, let's say we have licensed content at NewsCred. If we're not going to work on this product that is literally makes a substantial amount of money for NewsCred, I'll say, guys, like, I hear you're debating this product that we call Audience Insights. I think that's a great idea. It doesn't seem like we're coming to a conclusion on this. Let's talk about this other thing that's really important, right? And it's important to make sure that, like, because if you let it go off the rails completely, sometimes we get like stuck for an hour on something that's not important. Like, and because it's missing $2, and like people are in the room yelling, put your dollars on it, put your dollars on it. I'll put my dollars on your thing if you put it on mine. And like it just gets crazy.
So, the part which seems to be missing is the ROI on this, right? I mean, ultimately, yes, the clients are happy and all of those things are there, but do you assign, like you say, you assign goal to a client, right? Now, that could be because the client's been a very old client, all those things, but does it mean that because that client gives us the biggest money? Because at some point it has to be that, okay, you know what, this client pays us so much money that he takes priority over everything else, even though, it's, in the end of the day, it's about how much revenue and how much profit you're going to be making.
Yeah, I mean, that's reflected in our goal clients. It's also reflected in the conversation when the account manager says, hey, by the way, like, company Y pays us $100,000 a month. We can't like not do this work for them, right? It's all part of the conversation. And we had at one point, we did have like amount of revenue assigned to different slides, but it became like it ended up being like BS. So like we took it off and we just said we know basically those KPIs, we know what KPIs lead to good results for our customers. And we know that, like, if we got people to interact with, like, if I had all these cohorts and segments of customers, people that interacted with insights, like I said, increase insights visitation by 50%. I know that people that use our insights product were churning at 75% less than our clients that weren't, and that's why that is one of the KPIs. So I didn't get into like all the churn and revenue and all that implications, but that is behind the scenes. Everyone knows that information because it's part of the metrics of the company.
Yeah, because you said for the whole event is around like 3 hours, and how many challenges you already goes through?
About 20.
20.
Yeah. So, I mean, they've had these challenges for over a week now, and most people know what they are. And there's some that it's just pretty clear they're just not going to make it. So it ends up being a debate about 15 to 15 challenges, and we get down to like 10. And they've spent 3 hours themselves with their own teams trying to figure out what does the team want that they work with. So the result is we get these priorities from the company, and then we have Sprint Zero, which is a 2-week process that are, so the auction happens about Sprint 4 or 5 in the release before, and then the engineers, designers have time to think about it while they're working on the last release, and then they hit Sprint Zero when they are responsible for coming up to a commitment, and these are essentially the solutions to the problems that were included, and these are pretty specific. So several of these, like audit trail, separate publishing from approval, quick entry, they might be the solutions to one challenge combined. And you see that month 1 is pretty specific. Month 2 is getting less specific. Month 3 is really not specific because we're not creating a waterfall type of situation here. We're still agile, and we know that by month 3, we're going to be working on something we never predicted. So we don't want to commit to anything that's happening in month 3. We just have an idea of what we want to do. So unfortunately, the emojis don't work, but in this situation, you've got the product manager with the sunglasses looking cool, and you've got smiley faces all around, and it's because we have communication and transparency and trust. So that's it. Questions? Thanks for your time. I'm happy to stay after and answer anything specific as well.